Because I mean, a person can only buy so many physical books, right?
Right. So there's a whole bunch of people who say, I cannot buy any more books on just practical grounds. I've been banned from buying more books. But I'm so pleased to have discovered your site where I can continue my obsession.
Alrighty, we're back to the Levels podcast. Today we're here with Matthew Cockerill, the founder of Cookbook, ckbk Cookbook, which is a digital subscription service that's bringing users access to the world's best cookbooks. So this is basically applying the Spotify model to the cookbook industry, and it's making over 160,000 recipes available to over 20,000 users. So today we'll talk about the story of Cookbook and how Matthew thinks about design, growth, retention, and kind of the usual topics for the podcast. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So I think we can get started with a quick overview of your background, if you want to just give people the backstory on you and how you ended up in the whole cookbook space in the first place.
Sure. It was a little bit of a journey. I was originally a kind of bit of a techie, like playing around with a computer at 11 years old, and thought I'd probably go and do something with computers or physics. But when I got into my undergraduate degree, I kind of got seduced into the world of molecular biology, which was really transforming at that point with Human Genome Project. It was becoming a real sort of data-oriented thing. And that coincided with the dawn of the internet as well. So this became a kind of combination of interests, the way that tech could help you to better understand science. And I ended up going in that direction. And so I moved into science publishing, where the use of the internet and the big data coming out of modern scientific research really helped to change the way that the results of science was communicated. And I spent a bit of time working for big companies in that space, but my main experience was with startups, and specifically with a startup that introduced a new business model, which was much more around what was made possible by the economics of the internet. So we introduced an open access model that went on to be very, very successful and is now kind of endorsed by NIH and all the big funders. And that's now how scientists mostly share their research, so that there are no barriers to access, but that the costs of publishing the research, which exist, are covered by the funders. And that was an example for me of where the big traditional players kind of were looking at the internet but not really seeing how it could change things, or if they did see it could change things, they felt that disruption was threatening, so they generally weren't embracing it. And so it had to be startups who could find something which would work better and really make the most of the opportunities. So we did that in that world of academic and science publishing. But all the time there, I had a huge interest in the food world through my background, coming from a farming background, actually supplying potatoes to the world's potato industry. But then also my brother was a sort of Michelin star chef. And I was just really into cooking the whole time. I was lucky enough to go to some really great restaurants, including El Bulli, the famous Ferran Adria place in Spain, which totally changed the academic world, the gastronomic world. And what that meant was that as the world of science publishing and journal publishing changed dramatically as a result of the internet, I was always conscious of the way in which there was this other really interesting area of food, which had some crossovers with science. So like Harold McGee wrote a book called On Food and Cooking, which was a very profoundly influential book about really understanding the basics. But this whole world of food, which is a gastronomic culture which spans across the world and brings people together, was still just operating with a business model that it would publish print books, and you would decide which print books you wanted to buy, and you would spend money for an increasingly high production value printed work, which was all very well and was something which you could give as a gift. But when it came to cooking at home, it seemed clear that more and more people were realizing that this was not such a practical way to find what they were going to cook tonight, and that they would more and more, despite the quality and the interest of what chefs and great writers were putting into cookbooks, they would rely on what they could find with a quick search on their phone. And in a sense, they were making do because the traditional publishers were holding these print books and saying, we're only going to have them in print. So the way we went about, the way I thought about how could we find a way into this, and would it be possible to find a way into this, was to speak to lots and lots of chefs and lots of food writers about cookbooks and whether they thought, that they had long-term value, and if so, which ones they thought were important. And so we did something called the 1,000 Cookbooks Project, where we asked hundreds and hundreds of chefs and food writers to tell us about the top 10 books that influenced them. And they really leapt at the chance. So whether they were writers or chefs, many of them were obsessive about cookbooks and really pointed to some specific books as having profoundly influenced them and having built their career on what the inspiration they took from a particular book. And so that gave us some confidence that this, cookbooks were valuable across the board. They were capturing the essence of food and gastronomy, and this was something which should be translated into a digital world and should be made available in a way that allowed it to be used more broadly, rather than simply saying, can I, dipping in to buy an individual book. Spotify and Netflix had shown that if you really do open up a subscription model where you can dip into different things, it really encourages people to explore the backlist, to try out new things they wouldn't otherwise have looked at. And so we decided that was worth a shot, and we launched a Kickstarter campaign in 2018 to see if the other side of things, if the readers would be interested in the idea of this kind of Spotify for cookbooks. And that campaign was very successful. It doubled its target. It was featured on the homepage of Kickstarter. And so we went ahead from there to launch the initial version of the site in 2019. The biggest hurdle, obviously, was could we get a critical mass of content under license? And as I mentioned, when you have an industry which is operating on a particular model, say dominated by print sales, the biggest players typically are quite conservative and don't want disruption. But there are lots of medium-sized players and new players who really see the opportunity in change. And so we were able to work with many different publishers who realized that their back catalogue actually could have a lot more value through subscription models and on the internet. And so we launched with a few hundred titles, and we've been building up more and more license agreements with more and more publishers, and also opening up this amazing archive of books which have gone out of print. And that was a real defect of the traditional publishing model, which is that it's expensive to print books, and if you print a lot of books, it's then expensive to warehouse them. And so what happens is after about 5 or 10 years, the books just get pulped and thrown away, and it's not possible to buy a new copy of those books. And that is kind of crazy, because a lot of these books are really, really valuable and really, really useful, but you can only get secondhand copies of them. And so we were able to put license agreements in place with all kinds of authors themselves who were very, very happy to see their books being made available. So just to give an example, we right now have many books recent books from Prue Leith, the presenter on the Bake Off. But we've also been able to license directly from her some of her older books from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. So you've got this really interesting thing you could dig into, to not just the very latest material, but also nostalgic material of kind of just sometimes books people have been cooking with for decades, which they really enjoy discovering online for the first time. And so, yeah, that's kind of the way we approached it. And we launched as a consumer service. $39.99 a year, $4.99 a month. And what's kind of has been interesting is that it's not just the sort of home cook and the consumer who is embracing cookbook. We have a lot of professional cooks as well, professional chefs, and it's also now increasingly a big part of culinary education. So in other areas, obviously, your university, at colleges, you have a lot of databases, you have a lot of online journals to support your education. But poor old culinary students, hospitality students, pretty much had nothing. And so they were reliant still on having one copy of some doorstep of a book. But now a lot of those culinary schools are being able to give access to our whole library of 1,000 books, just all fully searchable.
That's great. I want to go deeper on the narrative on how you started and kind of grew Cookbook, and then later maybe a bit more detail on each of the kind of areas of the business, like growth, retention, and so on. But first, at a high level, do you want to just explain to listeners, like, how does the business of the Cookbook app work? Are you paying like fixed amounts to license content, or is it an agreement that's kind of based on the revenue share? And how does that work? Like, how does the whole business model look for this app and website?
It's very much similar to Spotify, or for example, Amazon runs a service called Kindle Unlimited. And in both those cases, there's effectively a royalty pool, which is some agreed share of all the subscription revenue coming in goes into the royalty pool. And then that is divided proportionately based on usage between the licensors. So every quarter, our licensors, which we have several hundred, they range from really big publishers who have many dozens of books on the platform through to individual chefs who might have 1 or 2 books on the platform. And they all get a statement showing what proportion of the usage their books accounted for, and therefore how that translates into a fraction of the royalty pool.
And how do you measure that usage? Is that based on like time on a recipe, or is that just views of the recipe, or how do you break that down?
We have all the content from the books, not just the recipe content, but a lot of the reference content and narrative material as well. But it's all divided into chunks. So essentially, when someone accesses one of those chunks, that counts as a usage. Now, obviously, sometimes people spend a lot longer on a recipe if they're cooking it versus if they're just flicking through. And so we account for that to say if you have an extended view by maybe you're printing a recipe or maybe you're cooking the recipe. But we don't make it so that if you access the same recipe 100 times, it counts 100 times, because for a start, that would make it a bit vulnerable to manipulation.
And then as far as the content itself, I imagine there's a quite difficult process of how do you take a cookbook, which the publisher provides you. I don't know if they provide you with like a print copy that you need to digitize, or an ebook that you need to break into recipes and everything, or maybe they give you more structured data. But how does that process look of just converting a publisher's library of even old out of print cookbooks into something that's digital and searchable?
Our starting point there was to think about what we want to have as our core data set for the flexibility going forward into the future. And that, funnily enough, the whole world of like the semantic web, recipes were the sort of ultimate sort of test case example of how you would represent structured content. And so that's very much what we do, is we think about what is the common structure of a cookbook which contains recipes and other types of content. And then the starting point for that can be anything from a 19th century Victorian cookbook, which exists only in print form, or we get an Internet Archive PDF scan, and figuring out how best to structure that. Or it can be a more modern book, but still where the publisher's lost all the files, or the author never had the files, and so again we scan from print. Or it can be the original print resolution PDF, so we can make good use of high resolution photos. Or it can also be an EPUB, where that's quite good in the sense that there's a lot of structure already in the EPUB. All the links, rather than saying see page 92, the EPUB will already have done that and linked to the correct section. But whatever we start from, we ensure that all those links, all that classification is brought into a consistent format. And that's what allows us to add so much digital integration to the service we provide. That's what allows us to be able to convert from imperial and metric and US cups measurements, whether we're starting from this kind of historical cookbook, or whether we're starting from a brand new American cookbook, or whether we're starting from a scan of a book we got from the 1960s. All of them can go into that same format. And there's a lot of classification goes on. Some of it also a mixture of human and increasingly AI annotation to capture the structure, so that we can have bookshelves which represent, these are the books we've got on Southeast Asian cooking. These are the books we've got on, confectionery or sourdough baking.
So are those AI systems only for classifying the books themselves, or do you also use that for converting, for example, a print PDF of some old, 19th century thing, or to structured data?
It's a developing area for us, because what we actually have right now is a fantastic training set where we've taken this disparate material and converted it into the standardized form. And so there is a huge opportunity, I think, for us to be able to scale up the volume. So as I say, we have a lot more books we could add. There's lots of books which are out of copyright, which are in the public domain. If you can get that process efficient enough. And because one of the things that AI can do pretty well now is go to a well-defined format and ensure that everything is valid to that schema when it's delivered. Now, it won't necessarily be perfect in terms of how it's doing that, but humans aren't perfect either. So that's kind of an important frontier for us. One of the main ways we currently use AI is a pretty simple thing, which is to do a good job of taking an American book and doing metric ingredients for example. It's a relatively trivial thing, but actually all the ways you could do it before would be problematic in various ways, and we're able to get really reliable results with the language models.
So would you say that the Cookbook's biggest differentiator against all the other online kind of recipe databases and websites out there for cooking is the big difference that you guys have a data set of cookbooks made by famous chefs, and it's like maybe a higher quality data set that you use to power everything that's on Cookbook, or are there other differentiators that come to mind?
I think we often have a look at a quadrant of sort of volume and quality, and most of the things which exist out there at the moment are either in the small volume, high quality, or large volume, low quality. So you can go to all recipes, and there's lots of user-generated content, and they have who knows how many recipes, but there's just a lot of chaff to sift through. Or you can go to Joost Mortelengi's site, and there's be a bunch of content there. Not everything in his books, but there is a bunch of content he's making available, and it's very high quality. And you can go to a site like New York Times Cooking, which is a paid subscription site, which has 20, 30,000 recipes, and that's pretty high quality content from over many decades. But again, you won't find everything there. It's good on mostly more American food, not quite so much international food. And what we are doing is bringing together this kind of using something like Spotify as our model, something which is increasingly comprehensive. If in terms of the most important books, our goal is to have all of those books which were in our top 1,000 kind of desert island cookbooks, and then the best of the new publications. If something wins an award, we are always looking to bring those award-winning books on board, and also other books which really prove their worth. So I think you would otherwise have the choice right now of, if you use Google, you'll find some good content, but it's all in different formats. Some's buried in a blog here, some's behind a paywall there, some's ad-supported over there. And that makes the experience of finding what your inspiration and then managing the recipes which you have cooked and what you want to cook next, all just to be a bit chaotic, which is not the same thing as if you're building a playlist for a party. Rather than having to download lots of illegal MP3s, you now just go and easily put that playlist together on Spotify or whatever. So that's our goal, is to say, if we bring together the best material in one place in a way that has a business model which allows you to support the creator, and importantly allows you to support the creator without being entirely driven by ads, because ads certainly can compromise the experience of many things. And when it comes to music, certainly always having ads playing in new music, people are willing to pay to not have that. And I think in the same way, to be able to actually just get to the content, the best cookbooks, without ads getting in the way, there's real value there.
On that, basically, you mentioned already the Kickstarter as kind of the beginning of or I guess the first inflection point, let's say, of the cookbook story. Are there any other, or what are the other key moments that kind of punctuated the journey from when you started to where you are now? Charlie mentioned first publisher on board. That's probably one, and I'm sure there's others.
Sure. I mean, with publishers, it was more of an incremental process. We spent actually 18 months before the Kickstarter campaign knocking on doors, going to the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is the big kind of global shindig with all the publishers, and talking about the concept, and getting a good response from the small and medium-sized publishers and some of the specialist publishers. So Wiley, for example, has been really important. They are a professional publisher, but they have this category of professional culinary textbooks. And they had always seen the opportunity for those digitally. They've done a few little things themselves digitally, but in terms of their overall online platform, it's mostly, I used to work with Wiley back in my science publishing days. That's more their area. So they recognised that a specialist site like ourselves, taking that kind of culinary market, could do more with their content. We brought those publishers on board. I suppose in terms of the Kickstarter campaign and going on from that, it was interesting the role that press played in the Kickstarter campaign. There's a couple of just US websites, Tasting Table, which kind of covered this idea of Spotify for cookbooks, and we just got thousands and thousands of waitlist signups from that. Now, in the end, however, only some fraction of those became subscribers to Cookbook, but it definitely helped kind of build momentum in the early days. And then the success of the Kickstarter campaign attracted the attention of Techstars, but specifically BSH, Bosch Siemens Hausgeräte, which is the German company behind Bosch and Siemens. And they were at that time running a smart home accelerator program in Munich. And so early 2019, that was a quite intense phase for us. We had launched our public beta to our Kickstarter backers in October. And then in the spring, we went to Munich and spent a couple of months building and getting ready. And we do two things while we were there. We released the subscription site. We took had our first paying customers. And we also worked closely with the team at BSH on their smart home Home Connect APIs. And so one of the examples of standardized structure which we do for all the recipes is if a recipe uses ovens, temperatures, and timings, all those oven temperatures and timings are captured in a structured way. And it means that actually you can, as you have a more connected kitchen, you can go send instructions straight from every recipe to the oven if it uses the oven. So that was a fun thing to work with the BSH, and has also been a platform for us to then work with their marketing teams over the last several years. So we're continuing to this day to be rolling out as one of the Home Connect partners promotional campaigns, emailings to BSH Bosch customers, showing them how they can make the most of their oven with this really high quality content from well-known names.
So you can, if with the Cookbook app, if you have an oven from them that's a smart oven, you can tell it like I'm making X, turn on to whatever temperature it's supposed to be for as long as it's supposed to be,
and then adjust it higher, and then buzz me when I need to take it out and add the extra bit, and then put it back in for the next thing. So
How many people use that? Obviously, you need to have that oven to use it, but I'd be interested, like, how many people that use that? Because it kind of, in a way, it almost takes away from the user a little bit, actually doing the cooking.
I think there's an interesting thing there about. I very much take your point about if you take the cooking out of cooking, what's the point? So, like, obviously there is a big world of meal kits and whatever, but I do think that if things become too kind of pre-programmed, it almost becomes like you are being a machine which is being told, do this, do this, do this. And there is that world. But I suppose what the area we've gone into is for people who, we also have a tagline, which is be your best cook. And the idea is by not just having, you might kind of have some nice pans and you get a good knife and a chopping board and you buy really nice ingredients, but you also need really high quality inspiration. And so we want people to get something out of becoming a better cook, and that means learning how to do things. But I think that there are absolutely areas where you learn things and you learn techniques, but I think in terms of what technology you use to actually let you do more, I think it's okay to, there are areas where it's okay to do this. I've got a really nice stand mixer, which I do use a lot rather than spending, an hour kneading things by hand. So I think it's that balance depending on where you want to go. But I think it is very important that we're not just all about shortcuts and all about figuring out ways to just get things pre-prepared. We've got a whole bunch of books which are like sort of DIY, make your own this, where it's something you would normally buy in a shop, but did you know you can make your own? And I think people, it's really good to understand where things come from and how you can make your own, even if most of the time you go for the pre-prepared version. It helps you understand better which are the good versions and which are not so good.
So from 2019 on, what were the next big moments? I mean, I imagine COVID might have been one, right? You had everyone at home. A lot of people were starting to cook new things around that time. Was that impactful for the business?
Yeah, so two things happened around the same time, one of which was COVID, which had a big impact. And obviously, suddenly cooking at home was very much front and center. People weren't going to restaurants anymore. And there's kind of a danger in that there are many businesses which kind of experienced kind of surges there and then weren't able to retain them. So it's like you have to figure out how to not to become completely identified with this sort of temporary situation and build something long term. But certainly there are lots of things we were able to do. We did a thing right at the beginning, which was we can cook through this or something. And we gave a sort of 30-day freebie to everyone who could just, without any credit card, they could get 30 days free access. And our publishers backed us up on that and said they were happy for us to do that. And then I suppose the other thing which was really important for us is that we launched as a website, but we knew that having an app would be really important, and there are different approaches to doing that. We don't have a big development team, so we had to think about what approach we're going to use to being on iOS and Android. But we were able to find a cross-platform approach that has allowed us to deliver an iOS and an Android app, which has been very well received. And so, yeah, we released that around during 2020. And so we're now always simultaneously releasing updates. Every few weeks we'll release an update, both the website and to the apps.
When you released the app, did you see like a big shift to people using the app more? Because you're standing in the kitchen cooking, you'd think an app. Previously they might have been there with their laptop or iPad or something like that open. Do you see that people just use the app more generally?
It's certainly mobile use is vastly dominant. One thing is that the path through which people come to us, Meta, Instagram, Facebook plays a pretty big role there, and those routes tend to go to a special offer through the web, which then lets you sign up on the website and you get access, and then it says, hey, and you can download the app for even easier access that way. And so mostly I think people are quite flexible about whether they're using us through the app or through the web. In some ways, there are scenarios, because we take the content of a book and we make it so, yes, it works on your phone, but also you can enjoy it with bigger pictures and a nicer layout if you have it on a big screen. So it's not like it's identical. If you're listening to a song on Spotify, whether you're listening to it on the app or on your computer, it's the same. But there are certain ways of using Cookbook where actually, if you want to maybe, manage your collections, that you might just find it a bit easier to do it on the web. So, I think we find that being a fully kind of cross-platform approach where you can just choose how you want to use it, whether it's on the web or on a tablet or on a phone, is that works well.
And it can potentially open up different kind of angles for content as well. Spotify traditionally was music, but now is leaning more into video as well, having music videos and short content on there as well. Have you kind of thought about how that might work with cookbooks at all, or is that not something you'd look into?
Absolutely. So there's different things. There's the short term, which is every time there is the potential to enhance cookbook content with video, we take that. And so there are many hundreds of recipes on the site and also techniques and tips on the site which have video. So for example, Pruli's most recent book has QR codes within the book, which means you can go to YouTube and see video of that technique, which is a little bit clumsy if you're using the print book. But if you're using it on Cookbook, then the video is just embedded right there underneath that item. And we do that across the board, and there's lots more scope to do that. But also the platform we have, which is subscribers who are keen to have access to high quality culinary content, is one which can naturally also extend to video. Now, there are other culinary video sites, some of which have subscription models and some of which we partner with. So Culinary, for example, is an online cooking school which you subscribe to and you have access to all their courses. It's basically like a culinary version of Masterclass. And that's a whole area. Ultimately, those are two very complementary things. We have a few partnerships like that where we also, for example, we work with Eat Your Books, which is another website, and what they are is an index. They don't have the content of any books, but they index pretty much every cookbook ever. And some people subscribe to that. Now, these are all complementary things, and we can see over time there may be some consolidation, because actually having one kind of culinary platform where you can, for premium content, you get access to the best culinary school video and also a vast library of cookbooks, and also you can look up within your print cookbook collection what page that recipe you remember is. All those things kind of fit together to be your ultimate foodies kind of resource. So we have good relationships with a few of the other kind of subscription players in our space, and always looking for ways to make that work better. So, for example, with Eat Your Books, we have a technical integration there. So anytime someone does search their print bookshelves and find what page that recipe's on, if we have that recipe right there on Cookbook, there's a link. And so if you have those if you're using those two sites, they work and integrate really well together.
That's interesting. So is there a universal index, or ID for these? That somebody has this recipe has this ID, and we kind of agree that this is going to be the ID.
It's it's an interesting question, because the world of recipes and cookbooks themselves, print books just go through multiple editions, and sometimes it's a new edition which is a bit different, sometimes it's a radically different edition, so it's quite difficult to even keep track. And then the recipes themselves reappear in different books and in different compilations. It will be great to figure out a kind of identifier, and essentially sometimes you just end up being sort of de facto that the indexer who has done the most comprehensive job and tried to deduplicate them, you end up using that. So I think what Eat Your Books has done in terms of indexing books has been pretty helpful. But no, there isn't, because it's a sort of quite an old-fashioned industry, whereas the whole world of, say, scientific journals, they standardized on a DOI. Every scientific journal article has one exact DOI and digital object identifier. You know that this other copy over there is actually the same article. These aren't two independent articles, they are just different kind of versions of the same one. And that's really useful. No such thing really exists in the world of recipes. Yeah, and another thing which doesn't, there are all these crossovers from my experience in the world of science publishing. Another is the sort of citation, essentially, and that doesn't really exist in a formal way in the world of cookbooks either, even though nearly, there's very few truly novel inventions. Things are always evolution of something else somebody maybe read somewhere else or learned somewhere else. And so good cookbook authors often do sort of make reference to where they've adapted a recipe from or what inspired them. And so we are able to add those links as well. So quite a lot as you browse through the ckbk site, you can follow these links which will go backwards in time sometimes, and you'll say, oh, okay, this person mentions that this is from this really old book, but this has been modernized and is still completely relevant, but you can go back and see the original recipe if you want in that older book.
One thing that strikes me as really interesting is actually the amount of partnerships that it sounds like you've got going on, because I imagine it's you as the founder who's kind of leading the both like acquisition and maintenance of these relationships. So what does your kind of day-to-day look like? If you're integrated with ovens, like smart ovens, and also all the publishers, and then you also have a relationship with these other streaming services and kind of related platforms, like how do you manage all these things at the same time? And does your day-to-day look like, 50-50 between like just relationships and everything else, or how does that kind of play out for you?
Well, relationships is a big part of it, because at some level with the platform itself, we have, we do marketing through Meta and Facebook, and we have to kind of keep refreshing that. But in a certain sense, that side of things, turns over, and the two things we have to keep doing are increasing the quality and range of the content, building new channels through partnerships that will get us in front of more people. And then also, as institutional sales have become more important, both doing the direct approaches to educational institutions and other corporates, others who could benefit from access, and then where possible also scaling that by finding ways to work with some intermediaries who can help us to reach more of those institutional sales. So, for example, we've recently started working in South America with a very well-connected pastry chef called Luciana Carrera, who has been both doing creating lots of video content for Cookbook, but also doing some great outreach work with the huge number of educational institutions training tens of thousands of cooks in Brazil. And so Le Cordon Bleu has a huge operation in Brazil, for example, and they work closely with hospitality departments in different universities as well. And so, yes, there's a lot to do on all this relationship management and partnership building. But we are gradually, in a kind of the virtual way, we don't have many people on payroll, but we do work with freelance contributors on a number of fronts. And some of that is content contribution, because we have a whole features section which helps to guide people in to discover the best content, and we have a whole string of freelancers who contribute to that. But increasingly, as we seek to build on what we've proven, which is the appetite of the institutional customers. And we've got universities like NYU and UCLA, and we also have the more technical colleges. We have high schools. We recently signed our first public library program. There's the public library system in Santa Clara in California. They have access for all their public library patrons. I've done a lot of that as the founder myself, but then it's working to see how we can scale that to build it, and that's the kind of phase we're at right now.
So is that would that be the majority of your time, you'd say, is on partnership related things as opposed to like meta ads, or maybe I don't know if you do development work, but also the development side of things?
The meta ad side of things, we have a chief operating officer, Jason, who takes care of a lot of the more marketing and finance things, including the budget and the approaches and all the sort of metrics we're looking at to see what works and what doesn't on Meta. So that's an area I've been able to delegate really effectively, which is great. Obviously, in terms of the working with our production team, I do quite a lot of that. They're based in India, and they're using a whole bunch of different technologies to get this very diverse set of material into our standard format. And so if we're putting online maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 new books every month, then there's quite a lot of work just making sure that all that QC has been done well, and that we're actually lining up the best books we can to be added. So there's a bit there. And then we on the technology side, we have got a huge wish list of what we're working on to add in terms of functionality to the app. Because once you have this material in the structured form, there's just so much you can do with it. I mean, one of the things we're about to roll out is everything around your history as a cook, in terms of what you've cooked and how you rated it and what different types of cooking you've done, and therefore how that translates into, are you one of our most active cooks? Are you someone who cooks from a very wide range of different countries? Are you a very good baker? And so that, in terms of, I think it's potentially really important in terms of engagement. We already know that people really like when they submit reviews or submit questions, getting responses from the author or from other readers. That's one way of driving continued use and engagement. But I think also giving people some incentives and some rewards around how much they've achieved by cooking more. When we talk about be your best cook, people often say, I'd really like to cook more, but I never quite find the time. And so one of the goals for us is to say, how do we encourage people to make the time? And in the same way, I'm often up just before midnight trying to make sure I don't lose my Duolingo streak. I think it's really important to encourage people to say, oh, have I cooked something this week? If I haven't cooked anything this week from Cookbook, I really need to do that. So that's, one of the frontiers we're exploring right now is how to encourage people to keep track of what they're cooking and do more.
And I assume on the website as well. Has that been a kind of big source of the overall engagement on the platform? And what are the future plans as far as engagement goes? I know you mentioned like maybe nudging people to cook a recipe every week or something. Are there other kind of engagement levers that you're planning to pull in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, there's just some basic things where, because we're a very lean team, we haven't done everything that you'd like to do, even just with the commenting. So it's definitely a bit of a unique selling point that if you post a review or a question, you'll often get within minutes or hours a response from the author specifically about what you were asking about. But people also, publishers aren't perfect in terms of what they print. So people will go, hang on, this ingredient never gets mentioned in the method. And then they'll be able to figure out, oh, the author says, oh, I never noticed that, and get your response to that. So that's already really helpful. I think one of the things people definitely like is some sense that their contribution's been valued. So just like being able to like a review or a response, just really simple. It's one of the different ways that you'll say. And we do have also, people can post their own photos with their reviews. And a thing which can happen now is that we select editorially, well, if there is no photo for that recipe, and it would be useful for it to be something other than just a blank space when you are searching on across all the recipes to find what shall I cook, we can approve an image so that it's clearly flagged as being not from the original book, but this is a user photo of this recipe. But especially say you might be searching a really early 20th century cookbook, for example, that has no photos in. And so giving people the opportunity to have their photos not only in their review, but also to become part of helping other people to discover recipes on the site as another kind of another source of engagement. I think something we also want to do more of is just making really good use of push notifications and some of the other ways to foreground things in people's day. So, I mean, New York Times Cooking has got a nice home screen widget which just shows recipe of the day. Our recipe of the day is nice, and lots of people get it by email every day. But I think also getting it as a push notification and just having it there to look at when you open your phone each morning would be nice too.
How does that actually work? Is that you deciding what the recipe of the day is, or is that something that's kind of gathered from the metadata?
We actually hear a lot from our users that they really value that we're not just a kind of blank database which you have to go to and search, because ultimately you don't always quite know what you're a bit, you can be stuck in a rut. You'd be searching for the same things. And so the newsletter and the recipe of the day, it's all about serendipity. It's about saying, here are some interesting things. Often it's from a book which was recently added. And you might have seen that book's been recently added, but have you actually made the effort to dig into it and see what you might like to cook? So we just pull out some kind of nice, attractive, easy to get started with things and feature them as a recipe of the day. And obviously authors love it when they get featured on the site and appear in an email. And more generally, we do features as well, so that when we send out our newsletter, often it will link to a feature, which might be, we do these kind of introduction to rice, and it will be talking about all different types of rice, and we'll have a whole bunch of collections, each about here's ways to use Japanese sushi rice, and here's ways to use special black Thai sticky rice or whatever, and all of that type of additional layer of content is driving usage and engagement, because, as I say, however good the content you bring together is, you need to provide a nice kind of shop window to attract people in. Just like Spotify's homepage drives a vast amount of the listening is by just people saying, oh yeah, I'll listen to that.
So the recipe of the day is global. Everyone gets the same one, regardless of preferences?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, in terms of optimizing the experience there for both international and diet preferences, a really simple thing we're planning to do is to make it so that you skip the meaty recipes of the day if you're non-meaty. So, for example, resource-wise, to have it could be like in-flight catering essentially, that we always have for every day a veggie option as well. So that may be the way to go. Obviously, it's all just a little bit more resource. Actually, we have another issue, which is we have a lot of users in Australia and New Zealand. And obviously, if we're going, well, it's a great time to be out barbecuing, and I hope you're enjoying the beginning of the summer, they're going, well, we're just putting on our winter coats. And
right.
So have you thought about?
Have you thought about changing the recipe of the day to like your recipe of the day, meaning the specific user gets their own recommended recipe of the day, and it stops being kind of a global thing and becomes more of a kind of one-off user thing that is just completely personalized? So
it's a good point that, again, one of the areas that there is vast scope for, and if you it's obviously with the sort of resources that have gone into Spotify and Netflix, that's kind of at the heart of what they do is algorithmic recommendation. And so for sure, algorithmic recommendation in terms of what you are given as something serendipitous to look at on the homepage, and also algorithmic ordering to ensure that when you do a search of all the different recipes using chicken and peppers, the ones you get are suitable according to whether you are super chefy or want to do something from esoteric with lots of weird ingredients, or if you want to put something in your Instant Pot and be done in 5 minutes. That is very much a way to get more value from the corpus of content we've brought together by throwing some data science at it. And we have all the content in a graph database, which has a whole bunch of algorithmic technologies which can be used. So there's a roadmap of things there in terms of taking combination of a user's expressed preferences, like maybe they've told us they're vegan, and also their behavior, like they tend to access this type of content or that type of content, and to, as a result, recommend things to them. As you say, that could be your daily recommendation, the equivalent of your...
I could see that being quite effective for users. I mean, just to give you an example, I was gifted a Moroccan tagine like a couple of months ago, so I've been doing a lot of tagine recipes lately, and it's one of those things where if the cookbook app got that sense that I'm doing a lot of searching for Moroccan cuisine, then that push notification, that comes at 3 p.m., let's say, that tells me, hey, if you want to cook something for dinner tonight, like here's a tagine recipe that you might really like. And it's just like perfectly matched to what's on top of mind and what I have ingredients lying around for and whatever. I can see how that might meaningfully boost the engagement metrics in the app.
Yeah, and you're right about timing as well, that if somebody has a particular pattern, I mean, Apple put this into app recommendations years ago, so that if you tend to use Duolingo at 11 at night, it will tend to make that the recommended app when you go there. And I think some people will do most of their cooking at the weekend, some people will do most of their cooking on weeknights. And so when you send notifications and what type of suggestions you give people, as you say, depending on and you can get too focused. I mean, some people have asked us, as well as recipe of the day, could there be a button, essentially a roulette button, and we could use whatever we wanted to kind of make it be a roulette from a interesting set, but they just like to be able to get something interesting.
Swipe, basically, to swipe through like you swipe on TikTok or something.
Yeah, because being too specific, I remember at some sites which are very driven by that sort of thing, and you signed up and you said this, and then you access one recipe, and then it was very difficult to get it to escape from the fact that it just seemed... thought I was obsessed with beans and I wanted to cook everything with 20 different types of beans. And it was just really difficult to unlearn that, So you don't want to make it too overtrained, but there's definitely... And I think we do have, when you go through a recipe, someone was just asking about this, and I was like, oh, we actually already have that. And they're like, oh, I just never quite scrolled to the end of the recipe to realize it. But for every recipe, there's a set of related recipes, which is like, okay, you found this one, but basically across many different books, we've got some other things which combine many of the same ingredients or something like that. So if you were to dig into a tagine recipe over here, not only would you'd be able to explore within that chapter of that book and find other tagine recipes, but you would also see some of our most popular tagine recipes coming up as recommendations that's related.
And am I right in saying you can actually order real versions of some of the books as well? Yeah,
we include links just for reference and for convenience. We link from the homepage on Cookbook of the book through, typically at the moment, we link to the local Amazon for that person. And if it's an older book, it will tend to be a second-hand copy. But if it's a brand new book, we have some books which appear on Cookbook on the day of publication. And the way that works, is that those publishers really buy into the fact that each of these different channels is complementary. The value of a book in print is different from the value of a book when you're accessing it on a phone, and people can discover things in different ways. And we hear all the time from users who are like, oh, I'm so glad that I discovered this author I hadn't heard about, and I found this book, and I bought this copy, or I gave a copy of it to someone. So people tell us they bought lots of books through discovering them through Cookbooks. So the publishers are happy for us to have that button there, but it's part of this kind of multi-channel strategy, which is we're not trying to eliminate cookbooks. And I think there's a little bit of a difference there compared to with music. But even with music, it's kind of divided up in a funny way, and there's this whole genre now of, vinyl has a resurgence of popularity. But in general, much more so than even vinyl, a physical cookbook has got certain things about it as a tangible thing which people like. But on the other hand, knowing that there are recipes in it which you're going to cook helps you to think, is it worth spending 25 quid on? So people often say, yeah, I tried out some recipes, really good, and that convinced me to buy it. And I think when publishers see that, hear that, that gives them more confidence to put their books onto the platform. It's not. There's obviously if you want to be super risk averse, then some publishers are, if we are in a digital world, maybe people will never buy a print book again. practice, it's just we've got now, many years of experience showing that isn't true. The different channels very much add to each other, and at the end of the day, when you're competing against other publishers, you want people to be discovering your book. You want people to know that book exists, and being on Cookbook and being promoted through our social media and having people talking about your book and posting reviews about your book. That's all helpful to creating buzz and getting your print book sold as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that experiment played out already in the kind of ebook world broadly, right? All the publishers were afraid that when ebooks became a big deal and they were all priced at, $2.99 or $3.99, that everyone would stop buying print books. And actually, print books have been like steadily still growing throughout the whole rise of the ebook. Like print sales have been even growing slightly, like not even flat. So that just kind of never came to pass, and it doesn't surprise me at all that it's a similar story in the world of cookbooks, where it's like people who want the physical like experience of having that book to have in their house and to be able to kind of really feel in touch in real life will continue to buy cookbooks just like they used to. And it's just expanding the market maybe to new folks who would take a look at it and pay a subscription for it to get access to all the cookbooks in the world digitally, but maybe wouldn't buy those, the physical versions of those books, because, I mean, a person can only buy so many physical books, right?
Right. So there's a whole bunch of people who say, I cannot buy any more books on just practical grounds. I've been banned from buying more books, but I'm so pleased to have discovered your site where I can continue my obsession. So yeah, otherwise the publishers would be missing out entirely on the market from people in that situation. And I also think it's all very comparable to audiobooks, even more so than Kindle, just because it expands the sort of the scenarios in which someone's going to be using the book, in the sense that with an audiobook, it's like people might be, you're not going to be running while holding a physical book, but you might listen to your audiobook. And when it comes to cookbooks, if someone is on holiday, what you're competing with is basically them Googling and just finding what they can find. And so you're allowing cookbooks into a whole bunch of spaces where otherwise someone would just have been using the free internet. And so that has to be better to be able to get your high quality content from your authors into a bigger fraction of where people's attention is. So, and a bigger number of the situations where they're actually going to be cooking. Because I think to some extent, a large fraction of cookbook print sales has become a bit disengaged from the act of cooking. And that's fine, because often the very active kind of browsing and whatever is fine. But we are very much about saying, what are the tools we put around this content to make it really practical to cook? Your phone, you can wipe the screen. We have it so you don't, the phone doesn't dim while you're accessing it on the app. And in general, it's about, we have a pinned recipe feature, so if you're cooking 3 recipes at once, you can just pin all 3 of them at the top of the screen and switch easily back and forth between them. So all of those things are just not that easy to do with a print cookbook, and especially because print cookbooks have become more these kind of objet d'art, which are kind of, you don't really want to get crumbs all over them. And so, yeah, having a version which you can just access on your phone is making it much more kitchen ready.
You mentioned the really obsessed user who is subscribing to Cookbook because they just can't physically, they can't fit more books in their house, for example. I mean, for that type of user, have you thought about features in the app that kind of let users maybe show off a bit their progress or their progression as a cook, maybe with like some kind of badges or something that says like this person is a pro at tagines, for example. They've cooked 50 tagines, using the Cookbook app, so they can kind of have a profile somewhere that maybe other users can access, and it's just like lets people kind of share in the journey, like how Duolingo has these sort of leagues that they make where you can see other people, progress.
And so I run a lot. I used to cycle a lot as well. So I use Strava, and Strava has a bunch of things like that too. And I think that there's 2 aspects to it. There's the personal progress, and there's the seeking that achievement. And then there is also the public visibility and driving that more of that kind of connected community. And we do, because we already have people sharing public reviews, there's already this way in which people are out there, and we let them choose a display name, so they can go under their real name or they can have a display name. And what we are about to do, as well as giving people more of their own personal sort of private profile of what they've cooked, which is just these collections of, I cooked this collection, which you can organize in various ways. We will have a profile so that when you see, recipe was reviewed by this person, then here's their public profile and here's everything they publicly reviewed. And if they choose to share their badges, then absolutely, they are maybe one of our top 5% reviewers, like Amazon used to show that. And or maybe they are a star baker, or maybe they are, again, a global cook. They've cooked from more than 20 different countries. So yeah, I think we'll be doing both those two things, having the sort of the personal progress bar, but also having a public profile, which you can have some, obviously some privacy controls as to what you want to share or not. But if you are sharing material publicly, then I think it's going to be, really, because we already have a lot of those interactions. People get to know the regular reviewers who post about a lot of recipes, and then they'll be, sharing tips. So that's definitely what we're aiming to do.
Have you thought about rewarding those people that make it to those higher levels and do explore more? Have you thought about, what those rewards could be?
We could, there's a simple thing like Dropbox used to give you extra gigabytes of space when you shared things, and there's a few things like that where you can just accumulate through activities. And so we could potentially give people extra months of access to Cookbook in return for them contributing to the community content. But also, I think there's scope for working with partners who have relevant culinary things which they could offer as kind of rewards to people who are some of our top users, and that in a sense that would could give some be part of our ongoing brand partnership strategy. We have various ways in which they might appear as a sponsor in the newsletter, but if they're also then acting as effectively a sponsor of some of those types of rewards for active users. So yeah, the real world rewards is a nice idea to get to. I think we'll start with getting the recognition, the intangible, kind of getting the badges. But I think if there are areas that we can give people tangible rewards, that would be great as well.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Matt. That was a great chat.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Charlie. Nice speaking to you both.